First Sergeant Kep here with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and thanks so much for joining us in the workshop. Today I want to talk to you about one of the most controversial subjects there is, leather care. Now before you get all fired up in the comments section down below talking about how your grandpappy was a saddle maker for 50 years and he taught you the only right way to care for leather, stop. This video isn't to try to tell you there is only one right way to care for leather. It's to try to share with you the idea that if you're reenacting, you have a lot of leather goods you're responsible for. And we're not trying to tell you how to do it. We're really trying to tell you that you need to do it. Whether you are a mainstream reenactor or a campaigner, you pick up those soldier diaries and almost every single one talks about sometime or multiple times during their term of service, they cared for their leather brogans, their accoutrements, as part of regular soldier life to try to make sure that those leather goods carried them through as long as possible. Now, if you are a first sergeant or someone in charge of taking care of the loaner gear or making sure and you're inspecting the soldiers underneath your command, you should really try to take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with some of the basics of leather care. This isn't something you have to do constantly. In Company D, as a whole unit, we'll pull out all the leather gear and do a full clean and refinish probably once a year. Personally, I maybe go through my leather goods twice a year. But since we finished up our last event of the season, and I'm going to be storing all my stuff away, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up real quick. And then store it away in a nice, cool, dry place so it doesn't get any mildew on it in the off season. So I want to kind of give you an overview of not the absolute right way, but the way that Company D uses it. And if you, in your company, address leather care or teach it to new and old reenactors, share some of your better ideas or some of the kits that you like to have on hand down below to help educate other people in our reenacting community. So before we get started, I want to go over a few basic things that you'll find in one of our kits. We always have a couple of horsehair brushes. We have essentially a clean one that we use for removing surface dust in grass, and we use for buffing oils and conditioners. And then we have another brush that we use for when we use conditioners with a dye or a pigment in them, or if we just use a straight dye. So that way we don't cross-contaminate our products. I'll have a small brush if I have to, when I apply, say, a leather conditioner with a dye in it. So that way, again, I don't contaminate everything else in my box. And we have just a couple of different products that we use. In Company D, we're big fans of Obenauf's leather products. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that when you're using leather, you want to use natural products on leather because leather is more or less a living thing, even though it's been turned into our reenacting gear. You don't want to choke off the leather. You want to have natural ingredients that will allow it to breathe and stay moist without oversaturating it. Obenauf's comes in all different styles, from this liquid to like a paste, almost like a car wax, and that has a different purpose. And then we buy a lot of stuff from Dell's Leatherworks, like my NCO belt, for example. And one of the last orders I made, I can't remember what it was I purchased. It might have been like a flag carrier or something that I bought from them. He actually sent me a pint of Neat's Foot oil. And that is an old standby, a great classic to have. And it came in like a little jug. And so what I did was I bought some of these travel size spray bottles that you've seen me use in multiple videos. And I filled them up and then I stuck them in the company cleaning kit. So that way, if we need to do some leather care in the field, it's always in the company for someone to go to. Like I said, the biggest thing you don't want to do, and is really common with people new to leather care, is oversaturation. You want to use just enough to get the job done, but you never want your leather to be wringing wet with oils. So with Brogans, these are my NJ Cicalas. We didn't have a very muddy or dirty weekend, so I'll just kind of demonstrate what I do. You want to use like a plastic putty knife, or I usually use a scrap of wood because I'm a woodworker, and I'll use this to remove any solid or caked on mud or grime around the Brogan. Then, since it's got a lot of surface dust, I'll remove the laces and brush all the dust off the boot in preparation, making sure you get underneath those laces and on the tongue, along the sole. You want these nice and clean. And then when it comes to rough leather like this, I prefer, not saying you have to do it this way, I prefer to use a liquid conditioner. And you can see this one comes with a dauber, which is handy. And you can also see I'm removing most of the oil from the dauber. A little dab will do ya. And you can see I've already done the toe of my Brogan, and this is the unfinished part. And what I'll do is I'll just rub it on, get the leather sole, and I'll just spread it around till it's evenly covered. Not trying to over soak, but also not trying to miss a spot. And then get on my edges, and I'll let that soak in, and then I'll buff it out with a clean horsehair brush. Now, if you have sort of your basic accoutrement leather, I will use either the neat's foot oil or the solid leather conditioner, like in here. So what I usually do is just take my little squirt bottle of neat's foot oil, put just a few squirts on a paper towel or a rag, and I just rub it in evenly. If it seems like I need to reapply, I will, but I'll just use a little bit of oil at a time. Like I said, you don't want this wringing wet. You just want it all cared for. And then I'll let that sit for a while, and then I'll give it a quick wipe down with like a chamois cloth, or I'll buff it out with a brush. And then that'll be good for storage. Now, my cartridge box gets a lot of abuse. My Sharps rifle rubs on it all the time. You can see it's a nice little wowie right there. And so when we have the dye sort of being abraded off of the leather, what we always have on hand is a leather conditioner with a dye in it. And it's really important to point out that we don't use any Kiwi products, because all that sort of polish just chokes the leather and it doesn't allow it to breathe. So in this, I usually use a brush so I can kind of keep my hands from turning black from the process. And then I'll rub this in to all the places that are exposed, as you could say. And then I'll follow my manufacturer's instructions as to dry time and workability. And then I will buff this out. And if you don't want it fully black, I mean, there's plenty of reasons to not have it, perfectly black all the time. But since we do a mix of sort of like field impressions as well as sort of more formal garrison impressions, I try not to let my leather gear get too out of shape. But if you're campaigning and you want your gear to last longer, you could leave all that abrasion on and just leather it as we did everything else. Now, occasionally your company will have the good fortune of getting loaner gear for cheap, or sometimes it's donated to your company. And sometimes the dyes have been so removed and faded off that no amount, something as simple as a mild dye and a conditioner isn't going to bring that leather back to life. So one thing you may want to consider is maybe checking out a website like, or go to the store, Tandy Leather. And we actually do keep a bottle of leather dye on hand. And you want to make sure you follow all your instructions. You want to make sure you have your leather prepared. Definitely want to use gloves. And if you do have to re-dye the leather, you have to make sure that you let the dye dry completely. It's not something you're going to just slather on and then hit the field with, because you might just end up with black socks and dyed toes maybe. But that is something that you can kind of revitalize used and tired leather to make ship shape. So that is something else you might want to keep in your arsenal. And there are different types of dyes out there and different brands that people like. So do your research, or if you are someone who uses leather dyes down below, give a shout out to your go-to leather dye for someone who's looking to spruce up their leather goods for the next season. So, like I said, this was not exhaustive. We're not trying to tell you there is only one right way, but there are a lot of ways out there and resources you can go to care for your leather that makes your first sergeant happy and maybe even keeps your grandpappy happy. So thanks so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll see you next time.